Hey everybody, Chad Yoder here, pastor with the Indiana United Methodist Church and co-director of Kiwanis International, training pastors and church leaders all over the world. So today I'm coming at you to talk about sermon prep. Now, I've already got another video in regards to how to structure a sermon. However, that's more content-wise. What I want to come and chat about today is heart versus head. Because I've been in sermons that were all heart or all head. And here's what I mean by that. The all heart sermons are full of great stories. They draw you in. They make you feel things. But there's very little scripture. There's very little learning. It's all heart and no head. Now, I've been in plenty of sermons that were the opposite. All head and no heart. It was all about, what am I going to teach you today? It was going in depth with things, and there was really never an applicable point that would draw me in from the heart. So I want to help you in structuring your messages on how do you reach both? Because Jesus reached both. Jesus taught people and yet still drew them in and promoted heart change and heartfelt response. So how do we do that? Well, I think there's a particular order to how things go, right? So let's start with this, right? You've got head and you've got heart, okay? Head and heart. Now, the question is, how are we gonna reach people the best so that they're drawn in? Well, I've made up a little acronym, right? So we start with this. First thing you do, you wanna start you wanna touch them. That's the first thing, right? So you want heart, okay? Or, in other words, your focus at the start of a sermon is heart over head, right? When you start your message, your goal is to draw people in, right? You're gonna do that with some sort of thing that's gonna be a heart thing, right? Some people use dramatic stories, some people use humor, okay? How you do it doesn't necessarily matter. The fact that you do it does matter, because this is what's going to draw people in to listen to you when you then go to the second step. And teach them, all right? This is where you get head over heart, okay? So you touch them, then you teach them. Okay, touch them and then you teach them. So once they've been touched and they feel like there's an emotional space that you're in with them and you're in the same place, there's this resonance, then you're open to teaching. From that place, people are going to be open to hearing the word, to hearing new things, to hearing what you have to say about that specific Greek translation of the scripture, right? They don't care if the heart's not in it, right? Head and heart together, okay? So you touch them and then you teach them. And then to wrap up your message, you excuse my handwriting. When you wrap up, you touch them from what you taught them. Okay? So you start with heart. Right? Draw them in. Then you teach them, okay, what does scripture have to say about this? And then finally, you touch them from what you taught them, right? So you're back to heart. And really, it's not heart over head, it's heart from head, right? Heart, head, both together, boom, right? So in other words, how is what I'm feeling line up with what I'm hearing, with what my brain is processing, okay? How do those things connect? That's what you're doing at the end. You want to touch them again from what you taught them, okay? Let me give you an example. I like to use David and Goliath in a lot of these videos. So in David and Goliath, you touch them, you might share some heartwarming story about somebody who faces difficulty, right? Maybe it's your own story, all right? So, for example, there might be some issue you've had in your life. Maybe you had a car accident. Maybe you had some difficulty that got in your way. So you're sharing this story. You're drawing them in from the heart, right? They're feeling things. Then from that, you move to the scripture and you say, well, here's what scripture has to say about when you face a giant. Here's what scripture says to do. Here's what David did. But then this last piece is where you go back to the heart again and you draw them into some action, right? You're wanting them to make a heart call, okay? Touch them from what you taught them. So in other words, if you're teaching them that to overcome giants, you have to have faith in God, where you're touching them is you're trying to draw their hearts to have faith in God, right? It's a heart thing. You want them to have faith. Faith is head and heart, but you see how they work together? So at the end of this message, you might wrap up with, I'm sure that many of you are facing giants in your lives right now, right? Brings them inward, brings them into the heart, right? What are my giants? I'm thinking of them right now. And it might look like there's no way to defeat them. But if you've got faith in God, right? The heart piece is you're making them feel encouraged. You're making them feel empowered. You're making them feel, right? Feel heart, okay? So you touch them to draw them in. And then you teach them from the scripture. And then you touch them from what you taught them, right? How do we draw back into the heart again, okay? Now, this general structure is what I try to use. Now, there is a great little shortcut to this process, because this is the easiest and best way to draw people in. But there's a great little shortcut that I like to use, and that's this. I preach in series, okay? So, in other words, if I've got a 4-week series, okay, my week 1, I try to make sure that weeks 1 and 4 are as powerful as possible, right? And obviously, we're preaching for power in all the sermons, okay? If you're not preaching to change people's lives, what's the point, okay? However, if you can draw them in on the first sermon of a series, that first sermon works as your touch 'em, okay? So in your second sermon, you don't have to focus as much here because you've already touched them, right? They're coming back the second week, especially when preaching in series. They come back in week 2 and they remember that in week 1, their heart was touched. And so that carries over, okay? Now, you don't want to completely scratch over, touch them, right? Because in week 2, hopefully, if you're doing great ministry, you're going to have people who are in week 2 that were not present in week 1. So you still got to do a little bit of work. But most of your people, especially if you're consistent people, most of your people are still remembering that you already touched them, right? So in week 2, you don't have to spend quite as much time establishing the groundwork that's going to get them to listen to you when you go to teach. Do you see what I'm saying? So I love to preach in series because this process all works together through the whole series, okay? Because then when you get to the end, right, it's all about teaching them or touching them from what you taught them, okay? By the time you get to this point, are you doing all 3 in that sermon? Yes. But man, you're preaching for life change now because you're touching them, right? You're drawing their hearts into something, to some response, okay? You've got to have that response available, right? If you're preaching a great message and people are getting it, they're going to want to respond. That's what this is all about, right? Touch them. How does what you just taught me reach my heart? What do I do about it? What feeling should I have, right? Make it clear. Draw people out. But preaching in series makes the first piece a whole lot easier, okay? Because you establish that in week 1 and you can work off it in each week. So you spend less time in 2, 3, 4 in that category. So you've got to reach the head, you've got to reach the heart, both, okay? You've got to reach both. Not one, not either or, but both. It's a both and, okay? So ask yourselves this week, as you're thinking through your sermon, how am I starting it off to draw people in? How am I touching them? Then what a lot of us do pretty well is the teaching them part. What part of the scripture am I drawing from, okay? And what does it tell us? What am I learning? What lessons am I supposed to be getting here? Then, at the end, you come back, right? It's full circle, okay? From what I just taught, what should they be feeling? Touch them from what you taught them, okay? Touch them, teach them, touch them from what you taught them. Make sense? I hope so. If not, reach out with some questions, and I'll be more than happy to help you out. I love preaching. I love life change that comes from a good sermon. So reach out if you need help this week.